Welcome back here with Money, 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 and this is the taxation special as we get ready for Budget 2017. So, gentlemen, we were talking about housing just as we took that break, and that's been a real buzzword for this government, particularly affordable housing. So, Girish, let's start with you. Are you expecting any kind of taxation changes when it comes to individuals, and whether it's self-occupied property or even a second home, which is not perhaps let out, but there is deemed income on that property, right? So, are you expecting changes there?
Absolutely. Housing as a sector is very important for the economic revival. The demonetization, RERA fears have some sort of put the housing sector in a slow path. It's important to revive the housing sector, and if you saw the latest announcement on interest subvention, it again shows that the government wants to look at housing very closely. I really think that this housing tax reduction, the limits for the tax reduction on interest needs to be enhanced. The way things look today is 2.5 lakhs is very small an amount to actually give the reduction to people. We need to really think radical out here. If this limit has to be increased to say 4.5 lakhs, and really houses up to 50 lakhs, 60 lakhs or something, which is the bare minimum in any place which you go today to. So if you radically look at this reduction, incentivize people to buy houses by giving them this tax reduction, which can go up to 4.5 lakhs, and also look at the falling interest rates, which is, there is a big feeling that with the demonetization money coming back into the system, the interest rates should be going down in the next 2 quarters or 3 quarters. If you put the amalgam of interest rate reduction and the housing concession, this can be one thing which can change the economic outlook. If housing does well, all ancillary sectors will do well. Whether it's cement, whether it's different kinds of things, furniture, fitting, so many different kinds of things are dependent on the housing sector. So I really see that this is one place where the government will have some thought and some headroom to do it. Okay. As for the second part, yes, everybody aspires to have more than one house. People want to make houses as their investments. And this deemed income concept, which is there in the house property income, that the second house is deemed to have been let out. Especially if you were buying a second house in a 2-tier city, like a Pune or a Nasik or Nagpur, wherein you just buy a home just to say you have a second home. And these houses are very difficult to let out. And by charging a deemed income on these houses, you actually disincentivize house buying. So that's one thing which the government should look into, at least if not for houses in Bombay, for houses outside the 4 metros, if they can look at some concession on this deemed income concept, that will be another way in which this can also be looked upon. And not to forget, the housing loan is also linked to the ATC deduction we spoke about earlier. So if you play ATC, if you play the deduction for interest, and you play the house property income, there's a lot of room to really revitalize money into this sector and thereby spur growth.
Absolutely, the real estate sector would be absolutely delighted with that. But Gautam, your thoughts on housing and affordable housing as well? I mean, we've already seen in that 31st December speech a whole sort of list of interest rate subventions offered to small home buyers. Are you expecting anything more?
Yeah, so I think in the housing sector, just given the approach of the government, if they have to provide incentives, my sense is they'll aim for the affordable housing segment, right? Because that will cover a larger part of the population, the Aam Aadmi, which is the focus of the government, rather than the slightly middle or upper tier. That's one point. I think another perspective on the second home, right? As Girish correctly put it, it's a disincentive to own a second home. As a country, we are short of resources, and housing is one of them. I think if I put myself on the other side, I'll say, why should I not let the disincentive continue? This will rather push people to say, I don't want to keep a house empty.
Right.
Let me try and give it on rent.
Right.
And if I give it on rent, then this deemed notion doesn't apply. I mean, even I agree, deemed notion is you're not earning income and you're still paying tax, right? But that's probably, I think, what the government would be thinking, while, we
don't hoard houses. If you're buying one, use it, or at least
give it on rent.
Give it on rent. Yeah. Okay, let's quickly move to the other aspect. And I mean, retirement, we briefly touched upon it. NPS and the big controversy from last year, whether there was an attempt to sort of tax at least a portion of the NPS at time of withdrawal. Is there a case for an EEE? Do you think that any kind of parity can be expected when we're talking about retirement instruments? Girish, what do you think?
I think EEE on NPS would be ideal. That will really make the money move into this so-called, future protection for employees as well as non-employees. And this is really what would be ideal. But would we have the headroom to make it exempt? Would that be the right path from a longer term perspective is something which can be a big debate. Last year at least there was a bold move to exempt part of it because 40% is exempt, 60% is taxable. At least there is something which when a person gets back it's tax free. I don't think anything beyond this at this point of time will have more headroom. What I think is to promote NPS, what would happen is that this extra limit of 50,000 granted last year can be extended. This can be made, radically different from 50 to 1,50,000 so that the ATC limit when combined with NPS thing can be 1.5 lakhs plus 1.5 lakhs or even more. That may be a better approach to move people, put their savings into these instruments. And I think the taxation exemption looks to be a hard ask at this point of time.
Okay, all right. Gautam, your thoughts on NPS and whether exempt, can be a reality, and broadly speaking, other instruments, investment instruments as well. If you're expecting any sort of tax tinkering, whether when we're looking at mutual fund taxation or any other investments.
Yeah. So, as correctly pointed out, it's a dream, right? It's a nice thing to have, a great thing to have. But PPF enjoys that. So, I mean, people would want or would rather really advocate saying, why not give it to NPS and then the real money can start moving there? I was exactly on that point, that from a tax perspective, there should be some kind of parity as to which instrument you go in. The idea should be to promote savings and you give a benefit for whoever's saving. And then try to create a level playing field between different savings instruments, right? So there is this, interest deduction of up to 10,000. You have the exemption for a certain type of investment, right? You have a whole host of other service providers clamoring and saying, look, why don't we also get a similar stuff? So I think the important point is if to the extent feasible, have a level playing field. So you have a basket, you invest, and you get promoted for that. The EE to EET. I think if at all the government is thinking of that, it should only be prospective, which is only money going in from the 1st of April or later. We should be very careful in not touching what's already gone in.
Yeah,
I think that's about retrospective taxation.
Yeah, that's a bad headline in itself most of the time. All right, gentlemen, quick break on that note. On the other side, let's not forget this country is moving towards the GST regime. Are we going to see any changes as we prepare for the introduction of GST? What will become expensive? Are there things that can actually get cheaper? We'll get our experts to answer that on the other side.